For 12 long years I had pictured this moment 100 different ways. I imagined my mother, Evelyn, opening the front door, her face alight with joy. I saw myself carrying groceries into her kitchen, hearing her laugh, feeling the warmth of her embrace. But never this. Never outside an aging bus station on the west side of Detroit. Never with a worn paper cup beside her, a crumpled cardboard sign reading, "Need help for medication." And when the elderly woman looked up and saw me, her son Marcus, staring, she didn't smile. She didn't call my name. She tried to hide her face. 12 years earlier, I had left Detroit with a promise to return, before my mother grew old. I had no idea that the lies had started the day I left. The taxi idled at a red light, and I stared through the window. For a second, I thought I was mistaken. The woman on the thin blanket looked smaller than I remembered. Older, fragile. Her gray coat hung loosely, her shoes worn through, a sleeve torn. But it was her. The shape of her face, the way she held her hands when nervous, the silver cross necklace she'd worn for decades. My mother, Evelyn Reed, the woman I had spent 12 years supporting, sacrificing birthdays, holidays, and relationships for. The woman everyone kept telling me was doing just fine. I pushed open the taxi door before the driver could speak. "Sir," he called, but I barely heard him. The cold September air hit my face as I crossed the street, my suitcase tipping over behind me. I didn't care. "Mama!" The word left my mouth before I realized it. Evelyn froze, looking like she'd seen a ghost. Then her eyes widened, not with joy, but with fear. She quickly lowered her head. I stopped a few feet away, my chest tightening. Nothing about this made sense. "Mama!" My voice cracked. Evelyn slowly looked up, tears instantly filling her eyes. "Marcus," she whispered. I dropped to one knee beside her. "Oh my God." My hands trembled. "What happened to you?" She shook her head. No, you weren't supposed to come." I stared at her. I had rehearsed this reunion for years, imagining happiness, relief, love. Not this panic, not this shame. I noticed the paper cup beside her, a few crumpled bills, some coins. My stomach twisted. "Why are you here?" Evelyn wiped her face quickly. "I'm fine." The answer sounded automatic, something she'd repeated too many times. I looked around. People walked past without stopping. Some glanced, most didn't. The city moved on. It always did, but I couldn't. My entire world had stopped. "You are not fine." My voice was firmer now. "What happened?" Evelyn looked away. The silence said more than any answer could. I remembered every phone call from the past decade, every update, every reassuring message, every time my cousin Derek had said, "She's doing great. Don't worry about her. The house is fine. The doctors are happy. Everything's under control." I had believed it. I wanted to believe it. Working on oil fields in Alaska wasn't easy. Winters where the sun barely appeared. Weeks when temperatures dropped below anything I'd known in Detroit. I missed funerals, weddings, entire years of life. But I always sent money, every month without fail. Sometimes more than I could afford, because my mother came first. Or so I thought. "Where's your car?" I asked softly. Evelyn didn't answer. "Where's the house?" Nothing. My heart pounded harder. The old house had belonged to my grandparents. The one place my mother loved more than anything. The place she swore she'd never leave. "Mama?" Still nothing. Then I noticed something else. A small orange pharmacy bag beside her blanket. The label was partially visible. Several prescriptions. Past due. Unfilled. I picked it up. Evelyn immediately reached for it. "Don't." Too late. I had already seen the dates. 3 weeks old. My jaw tightened. "You couldn't afford your medicine." Evelyn's eyes filled again. She looked smaller somehow. Not physically, but emotionally. Like years of carrying something heavy had finally worn her down. "Please," she whispered. "Don't do this here." I stood slowly, my mind racing. The missing medicine, the begging, the clothes, the fear. None of it matched the story I had been told. None of it. A city bus pulled into the station nearby, its brakes hissing loudly. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Evelyn grabbed my hand, the sudden urgency in her voice startling me. "Listen to me." I looked down at her. Her fingers shook. "You have to promise me something." "What?" "Don't make a scene." My confusion deepened. What are you talking about? Promise me. Mama, please. There was something in her eyes now. Not embarrassment, not guilt, but real fear. The kind that comes from knowing something terrible is waiting around the corner. I felt a chill run down my spine. Evelyn swallowed hard. Then she said the words that made my blood run cold. Whatever you do, she looked over her shoulder as if afraid someone might be watching. Don't go to the house right now. For the first time since stepping out of that taxi, I realized this story was much bigger than a son finding his mother on the street. Something had happened. Something nobody wanted me to see. And whatever it was, my mother was terrified I was about to find it. I stood frozen on the sidewalk. Cars passed behind me. A bus pulled away. Somewhere nearby, a siren wailed. None of it felt real. My mother was still holding my hand, her fingers cold, far colder than they should have been. Mama, where are you staying? I asked quietly. Evelyn looked down. I'm managing. That's not an answer. She closed her eyes for a second. When she opened them again, I saw something I had never expected to see in my mother. Defeat. Not weakness, not fear, but defeat. The kind that came after fighting for too long. I picked up her pharmacy bag and my suitcase. We're leaving. No! The answer came too quickly. I stared at her. No! I said no. For the first time there was real urgency in her voice. If anyone sees you with me here, it'll make things worse. Who? Evelyn didn't answer. That worried me even more. After several long seconds, she slowly stood up from the blanket. She moved carefully. Too carefully. Like someone whose body hurt every day. I felt a fresh wave of guilt. How many signs had I missed? How many times had she said she was tired during our phone calls? How many times had I accepted I'm fine because I wanted to believe it? I called another taxi. The driver helped load the suitcase while I helped my mother into the back seat. Nobody said much during the ride. The silence felt heavy. Detroit moved past the windows. Neighborhoods I hadn't seen in years. I kept glancing at Evelyn. She looked out the window, her face a mask. I wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but something held me back. The fear in her eyes. The way she flinched when the taxi hit a pothole. This wasn't just about money. This was about something deeper. Something that had broken her spirit. We pulled up to a small, unassuming motel. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and safe. I paid the driver, then helped Evelyn inside. She looked around the small room, her eyes lingering on the bed. You can rest here, Mama, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We'll figure this out. She just nodded. Her shoulders slumped. The next few days were a blur of phone calls and growing dread. I tried calling Derek, my cousin, who was supposedly managing my mother's affairs. His number was disconnected. The real estate agent he'd mentioned was a dead end. Every lead I followed led to a wall of silence, or outright lies. Evelyn, meanwhile, was slowly starting to open up, but her words were laced with shame and confusion. Derek said he was helping me, she whispered one evening, her voice barely audible. He said he was taking care of everything so I wouldn't have to worry. What exactly was he taking care of, Mama? I asked, my frustration growing. Her eyes filled again. That the house wasn't mine anymore. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. There it was, the truth. Simple, brutal, human. No elaborate conspiracy, no dramatic villain speech. Just trust misused. An elderly woman signing documents she didn't understand, and a relative willing to take advantage of it. What happened after that? Evelyn stared at the window. The silence stretched. Finally, she whispered, a woman came. I frowned. What woman? From what company? I don't remember the name. She wiped her eyes. But she said the property had a new owner. I felt every muscle tighten. A new owner. Not a family disagreement. Not confusion. Ownership. Legal ownership. The kind that could remove someone from their home. What did Derek say? Evelyn laughed softly. A painful laugh. He said it was temporary. I closed my eyes. Temporary. Another word I was starting to hate. He said I could stay, but the smile disappeared. But then he stopped answering my calls. My heart sank. Days passed, then weeks. The utilities became uncertain. The pressure increased. People appeared asking questions, requesting access, inspecting the property, treating her like she no longer belonged there, until eventually she left. Not because anyone physically forced her, but because she felt unwelcome in the only home she had left. The humiliation still lived in her voice. And I finally understood something. My mother wasn't just homeless. She had been made to feel disposable. That wound ran much deeper. The hotel room phone suddenly rang. Both of us jumped. I answered immediately. A woman's voice introduced herself. She worked at the county records office. My pulse quickened. I had left a message the day before requesting copies of property filings. Mr. Reed? Yes. We found the documents you requested. I grabbed a pen. What do they show? There was a brief pause, long enough to make me uneasy. Then the woman spoke carefully. Sir, there appears to be more than one transfer. I froze. Across the table, Evelyn looked up. What do you mean? I asked. The woman's voice became quieter. There were several filings connected to the property. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Several filings, not one. Several. Then came the sentence that made my stomach drop. And one of them was filed before your mother's stroke. I ended the call and sat motionless for several seconds. Across the table, Evelyn watched me carefully. She already knew the expression on my face. It was the same look I wore as a teenager whenever I discovered someone had lied to me. Not anger, not yet. Disappointment, the kind that hurt deeper. What did they say? She asked softly. I rubbed my forehead. There were multiple filings. Evelyn frowned. What does that mean? It means whatever happened didn't start 3 weeks ago. The room grew quiet. I looked down at the documents again. For days, I had been chasing one question. How did my mother lose her house? Now, another question was beginning to emerge. When did it really begin? That afternoon, I drove back to Leonard's apartment. The older man opened the door before I could knock, almost as if he had been waiting. Leonard's eyes immediately moved to my face. You found something? I stepped inside. A county employee called me. Leonard slowly nodded. The apartment was small. A single bedroom, old furniture, second-hand everything. Nothing about it suggested comfort. Nothing about it suggested someone living a secret, luxurious life. I couldn't ignore that. For years, I had imagined my father abandoning them to chase something better. Standing inside that cramped apartment, I saw a different reality. A man who had lost nearly everything. Not a winner, a survivor. A flawed one, but still a survivor. Leonard sat down slowly, his breathing sounding slightly labored. The heart attack had clearly left its mark. What did they tell you? There were earlier filings. The old man's face tightened. For a moment, he looked disappointed. Not surprised. Disappointed. You already knew. Leonard nodded. Some of it. I stared at him. Then tell me. The older man looked toward the window for several seconds. He seemed to be choosing his words. Then he spoke. The first time I noticed something was wrong was almost 4 years ago. I leaned forward. 4 years. Much earlier than I expected. Derek started handling everything, like my mother said. At first it looked normal. Leonard shrugged. She was getting older. Needed help. That happens. It did happen every day across every city in America. Aging parents leaned on younger relatives. Most of the time it worked. Sometimes it didn't. When did you become suspicious? Leonard gave a tired smile. When your mother stopped making decisions. I frowned. What do you mean? She used to know everything. The old man pointed toward the stack of documents. Taxes, utilities, repairs, insurance. He shook his head. Suddenly, every question had the same answer. Derek is handling it. I felt a chill because it sounded harmless. Helpful even. Until it wasn't. Leonard stood and walked toward a metal filing cabinet. He pulled out another folder. This one older, worn around the edges. I didn't know if you'd ever come back. I said nothing. Leonard handed me the folder. I started keeping records anyway. I opened it. Inside were copies of property tax statements, utility notices, insurance documents, letters, lots of letters. Most appeared ordinary. Then I noticed something. Several addresses didn't match. I looked up. What is this? Leonard sat back down, his gaze fixed on me. Those are the letters that came to my house. The ones I intercepted. He paused. Derek had the mail redirected. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just incompetence or a lapse in judgment. This was deliberate. This was a calculated scheme. The following weeks were a whirlwind. With Leonard's meticulous records and the county's documents, we had a clear picture of Derek's betrayal. He had systematically siphoned off my mother's assets, using her stroke as an opportunity to gain control, then redirecting mail and fabricating stories to keep the truth hidden. The house, our family home, had been sold for a fraction of its value to a shell company he secretly controlled. The money vanished. My mother, vulnerable and trusting, had been left with nothing. The legal battle was grueling. Derek, arrogant and unrepentant, claimed my mother had been fully aware of her decisions, that he was merely acting on her behalf. But the evidence, painstakingly gathered, painted a different picture. Leonard's intercepted mail, the timing of the property transfers, the medical records detailing my mother's cognitive decline after her stroke. It all pointed to one undeniable conclusion: elder abuse. The day of the hearing, the courtroom was packed. Evelyn sat beside me, her hand trembling in mine. Leonard was there too, a quiet strength beside us. When Derek took the stand, he looked at me with a sneer, as if I was the one in the wrong. But his confidence crumbled under cross-examination. The judge, a stern woman with an unwavering gaze, listened patiently as the truth unfolded. Finally, she delivered her verdict. Derek was found guilty of fraud and elder abuse. The sale of the house was nullified, and the property was to be returned to Evelyn. He was ordered to repay all stolen funds, though we knew much of it was likely gone forever. Walking out of that courtroom, a heavy weight lifted from my shoulders. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about justice. It was about my mother's dignity. We still had a long road ahead, but for the first time in years, I saw a flicker of hope in Evelyn's eyes. The house was a mess. Years of neglect, combined with the emotional toll, had left it in disrepair. But it was ours again. The first thing I focused on was the front porch, not because it was the most important part of the house, but because it was the place my mother loved most. For years, Evelyn had sat there with a cup of coffee every morning. She had watched neighbors walk their dogs. She had waved to children riding bicycles down the street. It was where she felt connected to the world. The old boards had warped, several railings needed replacing. The paint had peeled away long ago. I spent an entire weekend working on it. To my surprise, Leonard showed up carrying a toolbox. Neither man mentioned the past. Neither talked about forgiveness. They simply worked. One measured boards, the other cut them. Sometimes healing started that way. Not with speeches, but with small acts, with showing up. As autumn settled over Detroit, the house slowly came back to life. The roof was finally repaired. The leaking gutters disappeared. Fresh paint covered the weathered siding. Flowers returned to the front yard. Neighbors stopped by more often. Some brought food. Some brought stories. Most brought kindness. People had seen what happened to Evelyn. Many had wanted to help. They just hadn't known how. That realization stayed with me. How many elderly people sat alone, carrying burdens nobody could see? How many quietly said they were fine because they didn't want to become a problem? A few months later, Evelyn began attending meetings at a local community center. At first, she simply listened. Then she started talking. Not about Derek, not about lawsuits, not about betrayal. She talked about confusion, about signing papers she didn't understand, about being afraid to ask questions, about the shame she felt after losing her home. Other people listened. Then they started sharing their own stories. Some had experienced similar situations. Others worried it might happen someday. The meetings grew. Eventually, the center gave the group its own room. A small sign appeared outside the door: Financial Safety Support Group. Evelyn never expected to lead anything. Yet somehow she became the person others trusted. Not because she had all the answers, because she understood the pain. Because she knew what it felt like when your dignity was treated like paperwork. I attended whenever I could, and that became the biggest change of all. Whenever I could. For years, my life had existed almost entirely somewhere else. Work came first. Projects came first. Deadlines came first. I had convinced myself that providing for my mother was the same thing as being present for her. Now I understood the difference. Money paid bills. Presence eased loneliness. One couldn't replace the other. So I adjusted my life. I spent more time in Detroit, less time chasing overtime, less time postponing visits until next year. Because next year wasn't guaranteed. Not for me, not for Evelyn, not for anyone. One evening, nearly 6 months after the hearing, I came home carrying groceries. I stopped when I saw something through the front window. Evelyn sat at the kitchen table. Leonard sat across from her. A deck of cards rested between them. They weren't talking much, just playing, occasionally smiling, occasionally arguing over the rules. The scene felt strangely ordinary, and that was what made it beautiful. Nothing had been erased. Leonard couldn't return the years he missed. Evelyn couldn't forget the hurt. I couldn't recover the time that was gone. Some losses remained. Some scars always would. But honesty had finally entered places where silence once lived. That mattered more than perfection ever could. As I stood outside watching them, I remembered the woman I had found beside the bus station. The woman sitting on a thin blanket with a cardboard sign. The woman trying to hide her face from her own son. She wasn't gone. That painful memory never would be. But she wasn't there anymore either. Now she was home. Not because a judge signed papers, not because money changed hands, because someone finally saw what had been happening. Because the truth was allowed into the room. Because people chose to stop looking away. I stepped inside. Evelyn looked up and smiled. A real smile this time. Not forced, not afraid, just home. And for the first time in many years, I felt like I was home too. If this story reminded you of someone you haven't called in a while, maybe today is a good day to reach out. Sometimes the most important thing we can give the people we love isn't money, advice, or promises. Sometimes it's simply our time, before it becomes too late.